Once again on a Tuesday, I hit another double feature, and for the most part, at least I could say I like the second one better than the movie I'm about to talk about first. So, The Crow is a remake and also a new adaptation of the Crow story. Bill Skarsgård is our new Eric Draven, and just like the story you already know, he meets Shelly, he breaks out of rehab with her, and for the most part, they date, at least have a bit of fun, get high together until they're both killed, and you feel like, okay, so that's the end of that story. But no, he comes back as the spirit of vengeance, as the Crow, to do justice. And yeah, that's the plot of this one. And I feel like, okay, the way the direction of this movie, all I gotta say is that I know it's a new interpretation. I know they're modernizing it, but I feel like, okay, why modernize it when you couldn't just adapt something that's already perfect? I'm gonna start off with some positives because I feel like, yeah, there is good and bad in this movie, but at least some good does negate a bit of the bad. Starting with Bill Skarsgård's Eric Draven. For the most part, I like him as Eric, but I feel like some of the elements of that story is that you don't get the exact reason or origin of why he is like this. The thing is that the movie itself doesn't go the way of the original, where in the original you see he sees his girlfriend get killed and he becomes the Crow in like the first couple minutes. But in this movie specifically, everything is chronological. So the story elements and everything you see here is going to be in order from, okay, here's how I started out. I'm going to go into this path. And then you don't see everything until like the very end. But his interpretation, I got to say, it's not as good as Brandon Lee, but the most part is that he's just some guy. Like nothing about him shows that he's actually into some real stuff. He's not into the hardcore metal as I thought, because one of the things about The Crow that I like in that early movie is that it mixed a blend of rock and goth. So it made the city and environment its own, like Gotham City in a way, if I'm making that comparison. There's nothing in here that shows how much of the spirit of vengeance he is, and I feel like he's just some guy who was just granted these powers. The tattoos make him look metal, but the thing is that some of the tattoos in this thing, yeah, it reminded me a little bit of Jared Leto's Joker, but for the most part, the tattoos didn't bother me that much because once he put on the makeup, once he puts on the eyeliner and everything, all the tattoos and everything negate his old appearance whatsoever. And the villain of this thing, because I feel like Danny Houston is a good choice of a villain since I've seen him be villains before. But my thing is that in this movie, he has supernatural powers that are comparable to the Crow. But I feel like, okay, you have a supernatural villain, and me thinking, okay, but I feel like even though they were giving him that mystical power, and that does play a bit of a thing in the story, I feel like if he didn't have any powers whatsoever, and you're seeing Eric Draven go on a rampage and killing people just because they murdered his girlfriend, I'm like, okay, that's the thing we want to see, a small grounded villain. And he's the one who he's really not there for most of the time. He shows up once in a while, does a little couple things, but he's not too big of a threat compared to everybody else. And I feel like this movie was a bit too late in development because I feel like they talked about The Crow as far back as like 2022, I believe, when they announced this. And I feel like, okay, we gotta do everything now. We gotta at least give some respect, do a new interpretation of this. But I feel like the way they let this go, I feel like, okay, it's rated R, it's boundless, it's bloody, it has some cool action sequences in the very end, and a little bit in between because you're seeing him actually feel like, okay, I'm part of the undead, I'm coming back, but I feel like, okay, I have this new power and it's my responsibility now. And I feel like, yeah, he's not as tough enough to actually be granted these powers. He gets it by the very end of this movie. He doesn't fully master it just yet. But I'm like, for the most part, this guy doesn't feel like Eric Draven. He's just some guy who just got out of rehab and thought, you know what? I met this girl. I'm going to do everything I can to get high with her. But I feel like once I lose her, now what? I got to go after these guys? And it's not like he cares enough about that power. Once he gets the power, he knows he's on this path to actually go get his revenge. But it doesn't feel like he actually cares enough for Shelly in this movie compared to the original. Like you see the relationship grow in this, but it's not like he cared for her as much as he just met her, and it's not like they knew each other for a long time. It's not one of the best movies of this year, but I feel like, yeah, I'm a little bit biased to the fact that I know these characters. I know if I can interpret it into this certain way, I know I can actually say, okay, at least I have some familiarity with it. But I feel like this movie does it in a way where it's like it doesn't pay respect to the original. It doesn't even try to do something new or at least adapt something from the graphic novel. But I feel like, okay, if they were to just redo this whole movie again, actually incorporate some of the goth elements, incorporate some of the music, because I feel like music and goth is the good combination for this because it actually makes the identity of the crow its own. The environment in this just felt like a generic city. It's raining for most of this movie, and you don't see anything stylistic as the fact that you see a crow lead him into the directions of where he has to go. It's nice and all, but you don't see anything in that city that makes it feel like, oh, it's a new city, and it's not like, oh, it's just generic New York. A couple good action sequences aside, I feel like, yeah, this movie was a bit generic. It's not for everybody. It's not as bad as people were saying it is, because I thought, oh, people are saying it's bad. Okay, I'm in for some garbage fire, but no, not really. It's enjoyable, but if you don't know The Crow and you're just going into this as your first time experiencing this movie, let's see what you think of that, but also give the original a chance because I feel like the original is a far better, superior story than this one. I caught it on a Tuesday, and not gonna lie, my theater was full of a couple women in this film, but I feel like, okay, that's a bit of the target audience. There were a couple guys in there, but I'm like, okay, most of the girls, when I walked out of the theater, they ended up loving it, and I'm like, good for y'all. But then when one of them said, "Oh, this one's better than the original," I'm like, "Yeah, no." All right, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. All my social media is down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.